let me introduce my panelists this morning. Immediately to my left, Jig Patel, who's the Senior Vice President and CTO of Wells Fargo Enterprise Information Technology. Alessandro Ventura, Head of IT for North America for Unilever. And Manish Agarwal, the Executive Director of Digital Innovations for MGM Resorts. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. So let's do a bit of a level set this morning. When we talk about monetization, I think people put a lot of different casts on that. What does that really mean, I think, for each of you? And what do you really think about what that is and some of the potential? So I think we can kick right off with you.
Start off with a guy in the banking industry, so.
So you can define value pretty well on that, right?
Maybe. For us at Wells, or in general, a lot of my banking peers in here, the monetization factor is probably twofold, right? Depending on the size of the financial institution, especially from a customer perspective, the mass amount of data that we all have accumulated, whether it's banking or any of the rest of the industries here, how can we then translate that to help make decisions to provide products to the client, but then also really attract them to us and make them more sticky, right? Especially in banking, because as we all know, even myself as a consumer, many of those services are free, right? So how do we make the client more sticky with all of the things that we know about them from their spending and behavior patterns? But moreover then, depending on the size of the institution, how do we use that data to run more efficiently inside as well? So
monetization has both an external and an internal aspect.
Correct.
So Alessandro, you're more on the consumer product side, a little different coin on this.
So I guess for us is totally important. Steve last night was mentioning the fact that the world is becoming more and more complex, and it is. So until 5-10 years ago, we could make decisions like relying on our expertise and what we knew. Our competitors was, a landscape that was very well defined. Today, we don't know who is going to be our competitor tomorrow. And when I say tomorrow, I mean tomorrow, not in 3 years' time. So I agree with Jig. There is an external lens to it and an internal lens to it. The external lens is exactly on the competitor landscape and the competitive landscape, and also on the consumer side. So how can we acquire new consumer? How can we trade up the consumer that we have? But also, how do we spot fast consumer trends? I'll give you an example which is quite fun. Not for us. Last year, there was a company that produces ice cream called Halo Top. Most of you will be familiar with. So the paradigm in ice cream until 2016 was ice cream is indulgence, needs to taste good. Was anybody looking at the calories of a tub of ice cream? Not really, okay? Halo Top came into the market late in 2016 and went from 10 million turnover in 2016 to 400 million turnover in 2017. And obviously, some of that 400 million were Ben & Jerry's, Talenti, Breyers, all our brands, okay? So who knew that ice cream had to be healthy?
A little startling.
Exactly. So
ice cream for breakfast. I noticed there.
So
is
for
no
us,
ice cream.
the data for the outside lens is totally important, and then for the inside lens is also very important. How do we optimize? How do we optimize promotion? How do we optimize the supply chain? How do we become in our supply chain much more predictive and prescriptive? And how do we optimize those billion of investment that we make with our customers? So totally important, but as you say, we will get on to the pitfalls and the watch-outs later.
So the monetization for you is not turning that into hard cash, but turning it into value internally.
Yes, and hopefully hard cash.
In the long term.
If we figure out how to do promotion properly, that will turn out in a lot of cash. And then the third aspect, is trust. For us, consumer trust is very important. I think that consumer trust is one of the key competitive advantage in the industry landscape at the moment. And I think data and sharing that data or part of that data with consumers in order to get trust is totally important.
Other sets of value. Now, thinking about hard cash, Manish, on the MGM side.
Yeah, so thankfully, I think both these guys have covered a lot, so not much left for me, but let me try to mention a few things. So before joining MGM, when I was at MySpace, the social media side of the things. So I think in terms of monetization, the main thing is how the data that company has can help with the top and bottom line. For example, if you look at Facebook, per user, they make around $40. So their whole objective is how they can improve that $40 to $50. And if I look at a services company, for example, at MGM, our whole objective is, again, same, how to improve the top and bottom line, but at the same time, improve the customer service, how we can provide that personalized experience. Because if you look at today, the customer has so many touch points. They're touching your asset through the website. They're touching your asset through the mobile app. They are providing a feedback in real time on the social media, Instagram and whatnot. So you want to analyze and all that asset and provide them a personalized experience so that the customer keep coming back and it helping you with your brand value, helping you with revenue, and helping with the customer service.
So that helps expand brand, again, another angle to monetization. But I think Alessandro talked to one of the points that you're starting to head towards, which is managing some of that data can be just as much of a challenge. Alessandro, you were talking about establishing trust and maintaining it in that process. Monetization also, especially as we're living in this age of Facebook disclosures, there is enhanced sensitivity. How do you manage that personally sensitive information in that process, avoid the creepy factor, and really start to leverage the data in ways that are useful? Manish, from your side, what do you see as the way in which you can more effectively manage that?
So if we look at the way the traditional technologies were there, I think the challenge with the traditional technologies which were there for integrating a data, you were looking at the privacy kind of a data after the fact, once it is landed and is stored. So the way we have changed, and I think that's the benefit of evolving technology, and with the evolution and the introduction of AI, that when you are ingesting data, AI engine is making, these tools have artificial intelligence-driven decision making. So they are identifying at that time whether it's a SSN, whether it's an address, whether it's a date of birth, whether it's a credit card. And it is scrambled at that time. So when it is storing your data, when it is landing on your storage, by the time it is already scrambled. So that's the one way, because otherwise the privacy and ethics becomes very important factor. And with this GPDR, it is becoming even more difficult. Means if you are not doing it properly, you will be ready for the lawsuits.
So your point is up front, you've got to be able to deal with some of that encryption, yes, security, management, yes, hopefully some upfront classification.
Yes, so like these tools, they can able to do almost 80 to 90% upfront, and remaining 10, 20% you can still use kind of a supervised learning, where you can say, okay, for example, if I take example of a Yahoo Mail or Google Mail, you say this is a spam or this is not a spam. So you use a supervised learning, and over time it will learn. But in the meantime, what it does, because of the industry experience, it can identify this is SSN, this is address, this is PII, and it automatically takes care of 80% of that data.
So that's basically front-end screening for a lot of your systems.
Yes.
Now, being able to take a look at an overarching strategy in terms of how you start to deal with that also seems to be a big piece of that. Financial services, there's a lot more sensitivity, right?
Extremely, right? As we all know, with a lot of the financial services recently that have come under scrutiny, Wells Fargo included, not really for data, but for how we used the data, right? And so for us, we're taking a totally different approach. It's really not so much about perimeter defenses on how to protect the data and secure the data. It's really, for us, about the discipline of using it appropriately and correctly. And I think that's just as important as, you know, using tool sets and other technology to protect the data, right?
That's a,
How do you
a
use
policies
it?
and procedures
Right.
piece.
Right.
Is that something that's, do you have to do that upfront above and beyond the technologies? Does it have to go hand in hand?
I think regardless, you know, we're a unique example right now because of the situations that happened in 2015 and 16. But I think even prior to that, you know, our goal was always to instill proper discipline on how we create it. And then once we do have, you know, data from clients, what do we do with it and how do we do it, right? And so I think we do need to have other things outside of just the pure technology, behavior, right? Behavior of the people that are using it and creating it.
And that's a people piece.
Yeah.
So Alessandro, on the product side, is that as people focused? I mean, you're dealing with a lot of consumer side data.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is 95% of the use cases to use data, you don't need PII. So you can anonymize your data, and then once you anonymize your data, you can do whatever you like, okay? Because you cannot identify the consumer. But you start, that data is still useful to profile the consumer, to understand the trends I was saying before, and to understand all the different cohort of your consumer, okay? So you don't need PII to do that. Then the 5% of use cases where you need PII, there's a lot of frameworks that are already out there that you just need to observe and be totally scrupulous in following those. So I think that the first piece for us is to make sure that whenever we don't need PII, we just use anonymized version of that data. There is a new trend going to the market, which has been going to the market for the last couple of years, which is the shift, which we are taking as well, from digital mass marketing into personalized consumer engagement. That personalized consumer engagement requires very granular knowledge of your consumer, okay? It means that you want to target your consumer for what your consumer are really interested in. Because we all know we receive far too many emails that are totally not relevant for us, okay? So I think I wouldn't say the challenge, but the interesting aspects to that is how do you marry the two things together, okay? So how can you develop very good and sophisticated segments and targets of consumers? How do you build consumer profiles? How do you understand what your consumer are interested in and who fits in which cohort with, you know, observing and being scrupulous about the PII. And I go back to the trust aspect that I said before. If you start targeting your consumer, or you wish they are consumer, with unsolicited emails and unwanted content, you will lose them very fast. Whereas the secret there is really to hit in the sweet spot of, you know, privacy and discretion as well as relevancy. I think Amazon used to do a good job on that with the recommendation engine. I think they still got a pretty good recommendation engine, but they're losing out on the likes of Netflix and other tools that are developing much more sophisticated recommendation engine. So I think different companies are using different approach. We are beginning to build those muscles now, but really the importance of marrying privacy and relevancy to the consumer is a secret, also to get trust.
Actually, I have a quick data science geek out question for each of you. Yes or no? In the age of big portfolios of data, is real anonymization possible?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you repeat your question again?
Is real anonymization possible? And I asked this we start talking about, you know, this is something that kicked around originally in medical records days, back from SSI data.
Yeah, so it's definitely possible, and Alessandro just mentioned, like when we are even targeting users, when we are sending offers, 90% of the time you don't need those actual PII data. But what happened in the industry when users or our DBAs or ETL developers, whoever building those jobs, they don't pay attention, and then they bring the data in. And then what happens, then data scientists, developers start pulling the data, and then very soon the sprawl starts. Like 100 places you will have that PI data. So that's the one reason I was saying that if we can handle it before we are even landing it, it is possible. And that's where this AI-driven tools which are in the market now is helping, because 80 or 90% of the time they can take it in advance, and for the remaining you are still building the rules, so when next time it comes, it can help. So definitely it is possible to anonymize, and you don't have to know the person's exact thing. So just to give you an example, when I was at MySpace, we were displaying 7 billion ads in a day. So you can imagine 7 billion ads we are displaying in a day, and if the clicking or users are not clicking, then we are wasting a lot of digital asset. So we created the personas, and doing the market basket analytics. So we are not targeting a user basis on a per user, but we created a persona, like a soccer mom is a persona. So we were targeting the group of users. We don't need those particular details. So definitely, yes, it is possible.
So building personas, building cohorts are a way to be able to group those kinds of users. Yeah. So in terms of actually getting to a point at which you're building those personas, cohorts, groups, is that something that you've been able to do with the data that you own? Have you had to enrich the data that you're accumulating? Is this something you can build with some data you have lying around the house right now, or is it something you've got to actually spend to be able to make that data valuable enough or rich enough to be able to do more with it?
Well, go ahead.
I think this is the $1 billion question at the moment. Because data is, people are getting more and more hungry of getting more data. So I'd say, obviously, the more data you can get, the better, but there is an ROI involved into that. What I mean by that is, well, first of all, we do have a very good set of primary data, first-party data, that we own, okay? And that's a very good asset to start with. But at the same time, there are cohorts you cannot reach or you cannot get to know unless you buy data, you buy additional data. There's also a third set of data that helps you defining the landscape. So it's not only about the cohorts, but how the cohorts fits into the landscape. So you need all the three dimensions, okay? The question is how much is the real value of that data? What I mean by that is data has an incredible amount of value, as also, as people in this room know very well, a very high cost. So depending on what you want to do with data, there is an ROI discussion that you need to think about, and is, okay, what is the benefit I can drive out of that data versus the cost, the real cost that I need to pay to get that data. When I say real cost, I mean two things. You need to buy data, so that's the cost, but that's not the total cost of getting that data, because then you need to harmonize that data, clean that data, and do something with it. And I think we spend around 50-60% of money to get the data, and 50-40% of the money we spend is to harmonize that data. So don't be fooled by thinking, oh, that piece of data cost me $1 million. That's how much I need to pay. Because you probably need another $1 million to do something with it.
This is on top of the acquisition cost itself.
And so for a company like Unilever that makes $60 billion, as we say, $1 at time, the cost of consumer acquisition needs to be very, very low. So we need to be very smart and sharp in terms of decision making on which data we want to buy. And I think last point I want to mention, you need a strong governance, because if there isn't a centralized data governance, the risk is your sales team are going to buy point of sales data from their customers, and then your CMI team are going to buy the same data from your Nielsen, and then somebody else will buy the same data again from somebody else along the street.
And you've paid 3 times for what is equivalently the same data set that you already owned.
And I think that's one of the important factors of, excuse me, really understanding and focusing on what do you want the data for, right? Because whether it's us, Unilever, MGM, or anyone else in here, we're all probably sitting on a lot of data anyway. So do we already have it? Do we need to understand what we have before we go out and spend money to buy more, right? And there might be other companies that because of their size and scale, they don't have the capability to have a lot of that data in-house, and they do need to go buy. So in that instance, of course, it is, very, very important for that group to understand what are we going to go buy and why, and who are the targets.
So is that a process of working hard to discover what you have internally? Are there hidden troves of data that we should all expect to be able to find?
In my experience, you're always going to find troves that you do want and troves that you don't want as well. When you do that investigation. But surely the first point is really to focus on what do you have, regardless of size of organization, what do you have already before you go out and start spending more money?
So, Eric, it all depends on the type of a business. For example, if you look at Facebook, they are almost into everything. Now they are even selling things. People are using credit card there. They are getting the survey and whatnot. So if you look at Facebook, they may be needing maybe another 5% of external data. But if you look at MGM, we also have a lot of data, like some of the third-party data which can enrich our existing data, because we have 6 lines of businesses, like hotel operations, gaming, retail, restaurants, events and conferences, and a few more. So we have a lot of data, but I think the kind of data which helps us is like weather data. So those kind of data, but as going back to Jake's question, it all depends on the organization. Like, for example, in our case, just for parking system, we have 6 parking systems. We have internally, to serve our customers and to run our business, we have over close to 500 applications. So we have a lot of data, but if you go to data scientists and all that, they will always tell you, I need more data. Because they don't realize the amount of effort goes into integrating, harmonize, synthesizing that data, and then the money it costs to store and whatnot. So I think it all depends, back to both of the Alice and Jake's answer. What do you need? First analyze that. And definitely there is no harm in getting that external data, but you have to be really define and identify what do you need and how it is going to help. Because users will always say, yeah, I need more data.
And I think this is a skill gap that we have in the market at the moment. What I mean by that is, you're right, Manish. If you ask a data scientist, they can always do with more data. But I think the skill gap in the market that I see at the moment are the business translators. So the people that sits between, the business function and the data scientist that can really help translating what you need, because a data scientist is normally very much a purist. Okay, so you need to get to 100% precision to get a piece of insights done. You normally don't need to do that. Okay, you can, depending what you need to do, 80% is really good. Sometimes 60% is good enough to make decision. So how much data do you need? You need somebody in the middle that can facilitate that conversation and say, hey, this piece of insight is good enough with the 60%, 70% precision in order for us to make a choice of the direction we want to go, or no, this is an area where we need really around 90-95% correct information. I don't believe that there is anything that has got 100% precision information.
So, Eric, one thing I want to add, I think we all focus on the volume of the data. But I think the most important thing which a lot of companies are missing is the quality of the data. Because garbage in, garbage out, and I think that's where even I think from a technology perspective, I think everybody is a bit behind. A lot of not good tools are available to really identify and say, like, the quality of data is good.
Well, I think it was one of my takeaways from the manufacturing integration session yesterday, which is that just simply correlating all this information, being able to make intelligent decisions about quality, what you actually have, and then being able to tie it together is as big a challenge as anything else. You said you got 6 different parking systems. I would imagine Alessandro's probably got, in terms of product lines and overall touch points for end customers, a broad number. Even Wells Fargo, I would bet that you've got so many different data sources. One of the challenges is simply making sure they're all aligned.
And that's the key, you know, Manish touched on it, and we all have touched on it. There's just so much data that we all have, and what is quality, what's not quality, what is pertinent, what's not pertinent, what's valuable or dangerous as well, right? So how do you sift through all of that? I don't think anyone, Wells Fargo even, we haven't perfected that yet, right? We're close, right? We think we're at that, you know, 85, 90% fidelity level of we know what we have and we understand what we have, but there's still gaps there of dark data, right? Where we don't really know what we're sitting on. And is it valuable or is it not?
So you just put it all in one big data lake, and then you've got AI to help you figure everything out, right?
Or depending on how much, maybe several lakes like the ones out here, right? So
Well, and some of those lakes may contain alligators. Some of them may have an old car, some tires. This is, you know, from our experience with clients, it's also one of the other challenges is that, you know, the lake may be a repository, but then that winds up being the closet into which everything gets chucked, and it's very difficult to pull back out.
And I think that's where the discipline comes in, right? As an organization, so that you don't continually have people that are asking for more and more data, irrespective of what they're requesting, right? I think you instill proper discipline on how, what, when, and what type of data to request and who has access to it as well.
So can you start on a monetization process with an exercise to really understand what data you have? Is that something that anyone can actually realistically get their arms around?
Go ahead.
I think so. So absolutely yes. You need to have a fairly accurate data catalog. But I want to go. I want to speak more about insights. So I don't want people to believe that this is a super complex area. This is a super complex area. But in order to simplify it, I think. So the question is, where do I start investing? And I think for us, and for me personally, there is a very simple rule. Wherever you see a data asymmetry in the market, you need to start investing. When your consumer knows more about something than you, which is relevant to your business, you need to do something about that. Whenever your customer knows more than you about something which is relevant to your market, you need to do something about that. So this is my simple rule of thumb in terms of okay, in this ocean of data, in this complexity, with all this crocodile and sharks swimming in the lakes, where do I start? Well, start wherever you see the biggest data asymmetry. Wherever you see that there is a big gap between how much your customer knows about you and how much you know about your customer. I'll give you an example. Category management for Unilever is essential. Category management is the science of what product in terms of SKU you place on a shelf. In the myriads of products that there are on the market now, what is the best shelf composition for your Walmart, your Target, in your deodorants category, in your ice cream category, you name it, okay? Until 5-7 years ago, we used to be unrivaled market leaders in this area. And the customers would come to us and ask us to really partner with them to do category management. In the last few years, our customers not only have closed the gap, they've become better than us. So this is very dangerous for us. How can we become relevant again with our customers and not only be transactional with them? If we have a transactional relationship with our Walmart and our Target, we're dead. Okay, we won't see 2020. So I think again, my rule of thumb is wherever you see the biggest data asymmetry between you, your customer, your consumer, that's the moment you need to do something about it.
So are there particular techniques or tools you use to identify that asymmetry?
I think a simple, for our customer, is simple discussion, simple JBP session, joint business planning discussion. And whenever your customer shows you data that are better than yours, that's the moment you need to do something about it.
When you have those gleep moments, that's the point at which you look for it.
So Eric, going back to about understanding the data and asset, it's very important, and I think a lot of companies are struggling because they just focus on storing a data, and directly then users start analyzing and creating insights. And most of the companies, based on my experience, have missed the data governance part. So when I say data governance, like creating a data glossary, creating a data catalog, creating a data lineage. Because besides, if you don't have that, then the business user have no idea, once you have a lot of complexity, once you have a lot of volume, that where that data is coming from, what business rules have been applied. So this is kind of a governance and a documentation which a lot of companies, a lot of people take shortcuts and missed it. And then later on they're realizing they need to do it. So that's the very important aspect that people need to focus on it. And going back to your data lake, data swamp thing, so I consider this like 3 waves. The first wave is how to store the data. So I think data lake kind of, if somebody is doing correctly, solve that problem. Now the second wave is about unifying the data. Like you are correctly unifying, getting a cleansing, and everything is done. And then the third wave is the blending of data and enriching it with the third-party data. And then the fourth wave is getting the right insights and analytics. So if somebody focus on governance and these 4 waves, then I think they can achieve the nirvana. But that, to achieve that nirvana is not that easy. You have to be very careful, take the baby steps.
A certain amount of swamp draining that has to happen in order to actually make your way to that nirvana state.
And I think going back to the first part of the question, you know, we have to do all of these things operationally with the data, right? And absolutely, there's ways to monetize your data. The key is not looking at the entire lake or the ocean, right? Focus on one pinpoint first, and then begin there. And once you understand how and what you're doing to monetize in that specific area, you'll be able to repeat that model for other pinpoints throughout that lake or ocean.
And in true Millennium Alliance fashion, I want to make sure that we're involving our audience this morning with questions and such. I was going to actually ask a quick poll. We've already got questions popping up, so why don't we head directly to the first of the questions here. No microphone, sorry, I've surprised Nick with a microphone request. Making people jog at this hour of the morning, if you haven't already.
Thank you so much. It's been a great topic, and just love your feedback. So, I mean, my concern is there's going to be so much data coming in with IoT and the real-time type of applications that we're going to need from it. So, I mean, how can you guys just kind of talk about how you see us analyzing and then actually acting on that data that's going to come in from IoT across bank, you know, financials, consumer products, and entertainment?
You want me to take it, Eric?
Well, my suspicion is each of you probably
Yeah.
have a take on that. So, Manish, why don't you
Yeah.
got the floor? Go for it.
So again, as you know, IoT is starting means in the airline industry, they're doing it for some time. Like I heard GE, one engine generates around 1 terabyte or some data in a day. But that's a different thing. In our space, we are trying to test different IoT devices. Just to give you an idea, one is even like when to clean this garbage bin. Because our properties are so large, each property has 300 to 400 garbage bins, and if people are just roaming around and figuring out what to clean, how much resources we are wasting. Similarly, like each property, like largest property has 5,000 rooms. Now to analyze and see which room is available for the service, we are looking at some IoT devices. But with the advent of cloud, I think the good part is Amazon, AWS, and Azure, they all are helping. So we did a prototype testing because Amazon recently launched, which they call it Dash IoT. So the good part is they are providing all that platform. So we don't have to worry about what needs to be done. Once you use those devices, they're directly loading that into S3, which is the file system, then into database and whatnot. And even they are providing the reporting and insights capability. So I think the good part is you need it. But with the advent of technology, with these cloud vendors, it is enabling you to do all those things much faster, and you don't have to worry about where to store, how to analyze.
I think one of the keys to your question definitely is don't try to attack everything on your own, right? With the scale that we have, we still don't do that, right? We rely on specialists and partners that can help us with all phases of that, of how and what to analyze. Can they do some of it? Can we do some of it? Or do we do it together? If we try to attack this situation on our own, no matter the size of the organization, I think we're all set up for failure in a sense. Because all of those types of data are going to begin to converge. They already have, but they're going to begin to converge even more. And the waves that begin hitting you of data are going to become larger and larger and more complex. And there's no way, even at the size of a Wells or a Unilever, that we would be able to handle that by ourselves. So do rely on your partners that you're using and are connected to help you.
Actually, Jake, on some detail on that. I mean, I think we all sort of see this very large wave. Is this something that this is going to compound into the rogue wave of IoT data? And how do you do partner engagement to manage that?
Well, I mean,
big surfboards. I mean,
from rogue waves, like I said, I think there's just going to be more and more, and in rapid succession, right? Because the data is becoming more readily available, usable, it's going to be hitting us faster. And so to do the partner engagement, or just the partnerships in general, I think you have to be very precise, again, on what partners you're choosing, for what purpose, and for what data sets. Because you may have different partners for different types of data sets. We do, to analyze and critique.
So is that a sensitivity in selecting sources so that you can manage that massive wave?
Definitely. You know, sensitivity in selecting the type of partner or the partner you want based on which data sets you're going to, again, security and privacy-wise, you're going to give them access to, right? So you have to be very selective in that process and understand, you know, who the partner is, you know, why they're going to be there with you, and for what purpose and what access levels they're going to get and receive. And so you really have to take your time. And again, these waves are coming faster and faster, right? So it's critical to really have a plan, be very methodical about it, right? Think about it before you step out the door to go buy.
And my simple recommendation is start again from the question to you, what am I going to do about it? So in terms of real data, real-time data, do I always need it? Will I be able to respond in real time if I have real-time insights? So for us, it's real-time, near real-time, or just snapshots. And where we're using real-time data is logistic and transportations, because weather condition across the route for us is totally essential. We have 12 distribution centers in the whole United States, and you can imagine how far our trucks are, need to travel. And when you transport mayonnaise, which we do at scale, you really need to understand the weather condition across the route, because you don't want to invest on fridge transportation for everything if you don't need it, because it's twice as expensive as an ambient. But at the same time, you don't want your product to get wasted. So you really need to know with total accuracy in real time the weather condition on your route. The other area where I believe we will be going very quickly in real-time data is marketing. Over is the time where we publish a piece of content and then 2 weeks later, 1 month later, we analyze how well that piece of content is doing. Marketing is becoming more of a dialogue with our consumers. So that dialogue needs to be in real time. If you ask me a question and I'll answer you in 2 days' time, that answer may not be relevant for you anymore.
So this is a matter of sort of tempering your sources with that temporal immediacy.
Eric, I just want to add one more thing. So in terms of IoT sensors and doing real time, with the recent research, if you're analyzing that and you're sending a write off or write at that time, the conversion rate can be 10 times. So just be, I think, for example, a lot of companies now analyzing a Wi-Fi data where the person is, and based on that, like let's say a person is standing in front of that store, right away they're trying to send the coupon. So the chances of conversion based on the recent research increases by 10 times.
That's an interesting topic in and of itself, but I want to make sure we also have time for a lot of their questions. There was one.
Yeah, hi, good morning. This is Sanjeev from State Street in Boston. I will ask the question based upon 2 facts and 1 assumption, right? So Mr. Herbert Simon, right, the famous economist, he said that wealth of information creates poverty of attention, right? That's the first statement. Wealth of information creates poverty of attention, right, around that information. And then going to Mr. Steve from NASA, excellent job, right? Technology drives exploration. But the boundary of those pragmatic exploration must be outcome-driven, right? That what we are chasing out of that. And the third aspect, despite the best intentions, right, in our industry, there are certain non-negotiables, privacy, security aspect of that. So when it comes to your culture, that how you drive the culture, which is, sharing the common vision of the outcome, that what we want to achieve out of the data, whether those are around the client centricity, expanded products and services, continuous engagement, right, or the cost of avoidance internally, right, that how you manage the data, is there cultural element present in your respective organization, or what you have to do more beyond just technology as an accelerator?
That sounds like actually it's getting directly to Jig's point straight away.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, and I'll use us as an example. 100% our culture is core to what we want to achieve for the future, right? And obviously, as you all know, we are going through a cultural and behavioral adjustment, let's say, right? And so we want to make sure that everything starts with the people inside of Wells Fargo, so that we can affect and impact the people, the 80 million clients outside of Wells Fargo. So 100%, anything you do, irrelevant of technology, superstars, rock stars that you hire, it all starts with how you want to behave and what you want those folks to do to impact all of your customers, whether it's in banking, consumer goods, entertainment, right? It all starts with how you want to do that and who you are, and that all starts with your people. And then, as we were saying earlier, all of the access that your people will have to all of the data about your consumers, if you have the proper culture, they're going to behave and execute in an ethical way, or at least you hope.
So Alessandro, on consumer side, cultural aspects there as well?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I'm not going to repeat what Jig said around, what you do with that data. But I want to focus on the internal cultural aspect of how do we, the role that the technology team have nowadays in order to drive data-driven culture in the companies. Unilever is definitely not yet a data-driven company, okay? And the cultural shift that we need to get there is quite big. I normally tease our salespeople because I tell them, no matter how much data I give you, you will build a story around that, okay? Rather than doing something about it. Sometimes that doesn't go very well, but it's provoking. I think we have a huge task in hand to really shift our leadership teams and the culture within our own teams to become much more data-driven. Okay, give me the facts, give me the numbers. Okay, or if something is not going very well, don't build a story around that. Tell me what you're gonna do about it. Okay, so I think that there is the way to demystify data in our companies is going back to the question: what are you gonna do about it? Because if you're only gonna build a PowerPoint deck and you're going to tell me a nice story about why that KPI is red and not green, that's not good enough. That's not going to go green because you're telling me the story, unless you do something about it. This seems like, a very easy statement, but I believe is the most complex aspect of dealing with data. How do we shift the internal culture to become much more data-driven. And I was telling a joke yesterday, which I always repeat in-house in Unilever, which is everybody's asking for AI, artificial intelligence, big data. You know, whatever question we have nowadays, artificial intelligence is the answer. And people, you know, don't have much patience and say, hey, when are we going to get there? And very often my answer is, in Italy, if you have a 7 or 10-year-old boy, you ask him, what do you want as a present? Likely he's going to answer, I want a Ferrari. If you buy him a Ferrari, that doesn't tell he's going to be able to drive it.
Well, that actually, underneath the Ferrari driving, I think touches back to our opening keynote, which is that getting to a data-driven perspective, we've got to overcome a set of internal biases. And those implicit biases are going to drive a certain set of thoughts about how we should move forward. And it's moving towards a data-driven environment that we've got to think about more specifically.
So I think the main thing for the data-driven culture to like people start believing you is, one, you need to win their trust. Like if the business community does not have a trust in data, whatever you do, they are not going to come on board. And I'm pretty sure in a lot of companies, there are a lot of groups which are still using Excel, Shadow IT, they are doing their own thing, they are bringing data from, and then going back to your swamp thing or kind of a dirty data, then everywhere the dirty data is happening. So I think the cultural shift is, in a sense, it needs to start from IT, that you need to win their trust, you need to provide them a quality data, and you need to show them like where this data is coming from, what are the accuracy, and automatically data-driven culture will start within the company.
So that's actually building that culture of trust up front to make sure that you've got quality data that people can actually work with, that builds that trust up front.
Definitely.
That sounds a pretty hefty investment, though.
But that's where you need to start, because otherwise, garbage in, garbage out. It won't help. Everybody is using a dirty data, your insights are not right, your KPI is not right, and after some time, people will lose faith and they won't be using the data. They will, because right now with the cloud, the issue is anybody can do anything. They are not totally dependent on IT, because they can start an instance on AWS or Azure, they pull their data, they can start doing the thing. So that's the reason you need to be very careful what you are providing and whether you are providing them a quality data or not.
They can go out and buy their own Ferrari.
Definitely.
All right, we have other questions floating around out there. If not, I've got a herd of additional. All right, nobody, up.
So, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, creating these personas and cohorts, and then simultaneously you've got the public realizing through the Facebook Cambridge Analytica thing that they always have been the product all along. And for years, you know, we've ticked boxes, will we accept additional marketing and all the rest of it. So I'm just wondering whether you can imagine a situation where, rather than us trying to decipher the personas, as individual consumers, we can actually opt in and say, hang on, this is my persona. I'm going to tell you what you need to know rather than you trying to divine it from my activities. And in return, what are you going to give me?
I think we already do that in many cases, regardless of industry. We're asking and soliciting information from the customer anyway. And in many cases, they are more than willing to tell us, you know, who they are, what they are, where they are, you know, where they spend money, where they do activities, and they're providing that to us, right? And it would be great if myself, even as a consumer, if I could, you know, go to a Target and say, here are all the things that I like, right? And I can actually do that on their website now and say, these are all the things that I like, and then based on that input, they're going to build a profile or persona about me, right? Amazon does it really well, right? Google does it really well. Lots of other consumer retailers do it really well. Banks do it really well. And I think, you know, we are already soliciting, consciously or unconsciously, information from our consumers, and in many cases they're willing to provide all of that, and that's where the criticality comes in about all of this data, what we do with it as the companies, and, you know, with all the aspects that we discussed today, right? secure it, protect it? What do we do with it? Who's touching it? Who's not touching it?
Yeah, but is there an end consumer monetization, which sounded like maybe was at the root of that question, which is, do we get to a point at which we return some of that monetized value to the end consumer?
Yeah, and
Do we give them the Ferrari?
And I think this is so a couple of things. This is the consumer is the monetization of data from a consumer angle is already happening. If you think about coupons, which are very much used in the U.S., people are happy to disclose some information to get coupons and discounts. Okay, I think with regards to what do I give and what do I get is really around what am I happy to disclose in return to which. So, for example, I would give easily all my healthcare data if I could receive a better healthcare treatment. If I could receive a real-time healthcare treatment with less need to visit doctors and hospitals, with all the issues that come with that, I wouldn't think twice about disclosing that. So it's all about what data do I give to whom in exchange of what. The issue at the moment is that it's not a binary agreement. I start an agreement with you, I disclose the data with you, and then all of a sudden the world knows. Okay? So I think that there is a need of building a much better trust, and hopefully GDPR in Europe is possibly a first step to that, so that these agreements are and remain binaries and remain transparent rather than all of a sudden the world knows that you are the head of IT of Unilever, and everybody and their grandmother starts selling you pieces of software that are completely irrelevant to you.
It's being able to get some of that data back once it's released to the wild. What are the odds that that happens at MGM?
So I think not at MGM, in general too. I think going back to your question, I think I will just put in two words: trust and value. Like, if I can trust that whatever information I'm giving to Facebook is not going outside and Facebook is using it just on purpose, I think we are not there yet. Once that happens, maybe we start doing it. Second thing, in terms of value, let's say if a company comes to me and say, give all your data, and whatever you invest in stocks, you will start getting 10 times return. I will definitely give them all my data. But I don't think we are there. So I think until unless the trust part is there, and somebody show me that with their data I can get the value back, I think we are not there. Maybe in 5-10 years we will be there, and but unconsciously, yes, Google, Facebook, they have a lot of access to our data. They know a lot about us. You all may have seen, like, you are doing something or you're talking something, and suddenly that feed start appearing in your Facebook. It happens with me a lot of time. Even yesterday in one of the session, we were talking about autonomous car. And I'm not sure whether the Facebook is listening on my phone or whatnot. When I reached to the room, in my feed, there was a Tesla's autonomous news article was there. And it was exactly relevant to what I was talking about in that session.
Well, we're getting to that trust level. I'm trying to figure out at this point what I need to disclose to get that Ferrari. But a Tesla would do. Well, gentlemen, I thank you very much. A fascinating topic that I think we could go on for another hour about. And thank you for all the great questions. We've kicked off things to a great morning this morning. Won't you join me in thanking my panelists this morning?